here's what I wanted to tell you about the TSA. Because this is, as part of the TSA's request, now you know what the TSA is, the Transportation Security Administration, those guys that wear the uniforms in airports. You thought they were just restricted to airports? No way. Listen to this. As part of their request for 2012 funding, TSA Administrator John Pistole, P-I-S-T-O-L-E, told Congress last week that the TSA conducts 8,000 unannounced security screenings every year. And they are all over the place. They are conducted with local law enforcement agencies as well as immigration, because they're now working with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and they're also working with Border Patrol. So you can have your immigration status examined along with everything else that they look at. More and more, the TSA is giving airport-style pat-downs and screenings of unsuspecting passengers at bus terminals, ferries, and subways. And they call it part of their VIPR program, Visible Intermodal Prevention and Response. They have 25 teams doing impromptu searches, and they want our taxpayer dollars to pay for another 12 more teams. So while they're cutting your hospital bills and they're cutting your Medicare reimbursements, and they're telling you that they can't afford new roads, new schools, new anything that a government really needs to thrive and survive, they want to increase the amount of spying we do on each other. The searches are in the name of passenger security. And listen to this. It's not the only goal of the VIPR, in fact, for security. What we're looking for, and this is a quote from Steve McDonald from U.S. Border Patrol, they're looking for immigration law violators and threats to national security. They're also looking for smuggling. And they're using the element of surprise as a deterrent to, quote, the bad guys. And a VIPR screening at a Des Moines Greyhound station is alleged to have targeted Latinos. Another TSA Border Patrol VIPR screening on a trolley in San Diego resulted in 3 teens being handcuffed and deported while on their way to school. According to the San Diego Metropolitan Transit System, let's see. That's where the trolley is. A spokesman for the girl's family says, "We believe this is a flagrant violation of human rights. Children are being separated from their families without due process rights." The 3 teens were deported to Tijuana that day, but later allowed to re-enter because of humanitarian reasons. More children, train passengers disembarking at Savannah, Georgia, were also treated to questionable TSA treatment in February along with their families. The TSA people were lifting their shirts. They were touching their bras. And they weren't even examining their luggage. VIPR operations are now targeting freight trucks on highways. In addition to random checks on public transit systems, it makes you wonder, says this article, can private vehicles be far behind? Will there be any mode of transportation beyond the reach of the TSA? That's a really good question. And what kind of country do you want to live in? What are you willing to bear in terms of your intrusiveness of your police? How important is it to you to catch people that are illegally across the border? Is it important enough for you that they can violate your civil rights without any reasonable probable cause? Because that's what's happening, just because they want to. You know, this reminds me of an old science fiction movie I saw years ago. I don't know if you ever saw it. It wasn't even really science fiction. It was about the United States had been overrun in terms of population, and Canada was considered to be the safe harbor. And it was all about people that were trying to escape to Canada because it was a much better place to live. Because in the United States, there were intrusive police on every corner that were patting down people and looking for criminals. And in this case, I think the crime was having more than one child. So it was some kind of science fiction population kind of thing. You know, last I checked, having the status of being an illegal immigrant does not really make you a criminal. Being a criminal, and I mean this, is an intent to break a law that really hurts people. I know it sounds very I know that you're going to disagree with me about this because there is some intent, there is some kind of quasi-criminal intent involved in staying beyond one's visa and trying to get across the border to live a better life. But when you and I really think about criminals, we think about people trying to hurt each other. We don't really think about the vast amount of illegal immigrants who are here trying to make beds in hotels, cut grass, clean people's homes, do odd jobs, repair roofs, paint houses, work at printers' offices and restaurants, and very often do the odd jobs that other people don't want to do. You don't really think of that as criminal enterprise, do you? Because if you do, you have to go back to think about your grandparents and great-grandparents and what they did when they got here as tailors and plumbers and peddlers and small merchandising people, so that the next generation, that your parents or you, could go to college and do that traditional American dream thing. Most of the people that are here as illegals, they only want a shot at that brass ring. The ones that are drug smugglers, they're criminals. They're criminals, they need to go. They're not the people that are being found in these random TSA pat-downs of teenagers on their way to school. Who are we kidding? Who are we kidding? The police know who the criminals are. This is a dragnet for citizens and for non-citizens, for the police to use power that they've never had before. We don't have a Supreme Court that cares. We don't have a president, Democratic or otherwise, that cares. We don't have a Congress that cares. We don't have anybody that cares. And the irony about this is that Drudge Report, which is always considered to be the far-right place where news aggregation occurs, is quoting publications like Mother Jones, which is far left. Because on this, the far right and the far left agree. We don't want the government and we don't want the police where they don't belong. And they don't belong searching us on our buses, even in our airports, and our homes and our cars, just because they want to. Because we are allowing ourselves step by step to be transformed into a police state. And even President Bush, who started all of this initiative as his fear-laden response to 2001, I can't imagine he'd be happy about it. On the other hand, to be fair, I'm sure he can't relate. When people are that high up, they are so insulated by their power and positions of power. They are so insulated and so held back from what the ordinary person experiences that they simply refuse to see what's in front of them. And that's the other problem that we've reached as a country. That as people become higher and higher up, as they become richer and richer, they are more and more insulated. 50 years ago, we didn't have gated communities the way we have now that keep people away that aren't good enough to live with us. We didn't have the kinds of VIP lounges and VIP accommodations that hires up rich people and celebrities get to have. And I'll tell you, even 50 years ago when I used to work for TWA, all the so-called VIPs came to the first-class counter like everybody else. They didn't even have private planes. My point is that the people that might have influence in changing government policy are not affected by these policies. That's the problem. Do you really think, for example, like the draft, do you really think if we had a draft we'd been in Afghanistan? There's no way we'd be in Afghanistan because all the congressmen's sons and daughters would be in a draft. So we wouldn't be there. But because less than 1% of the people volunteer and have their lives on the line, we're there because it doesn't really affect us. Doesn't affect the us that are the privileged. And if we didn't have private planes, which don't have the TSA kind of regulations, trust me, they don't. And if every person, high and low, had to be subjected to pat-downs, do you think we'd have as many pat-downs? We wouldn't. If George Bush, as president, had to be subjected to a pat-down. I remember Mike Huckabee early on in this, and he was one of the only, if not the only, that I remember, media person of renown who insisted that his mother and his mother-in-law and he fly regular so that they could be subjected to this pat down so you could know what it was about and object to it. The problem is that the people that are in positions of decision making are making decisions for you and me that have no consequences for them. And when that happens, big picture, long term, when that happens, you no longer have a democracy as we think of ourselves. You start to have an oligarchy. You start to have an aristocracy. You start to create the seeds of the real division between the rich and poor, not merely money, but access and privilege that caused things like the French Revolution. The French Revolution was because the aristocracy couldn't relate to the claims of hunger of the vast majority of poor people. Because what? They weren't hungry. Their bellies weren't empty. What? And so when people from the bottom start to clamor, and we will, and we are, that our society is changing in ways that we don't like, if the people at the top are not going to listen, that's what causes unrest and class division and bad things to happen. And it begins with policies like this, where the average Joe Schmo on a train to Amtrak or a Greyhound bus or in their own car gets stopped and patted down by the TSA. Mark my words, that's where it begins. That's where the anger begins.